It's another Friday, so let's answer some questions from the listeners.
You are Locked On Royals, your daily Kansas City Royals podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
You are tuning to another edition of Locked On Royals on the Locked On Podcast Network. As always, I'm your host, Jack Johnson, and you can find me on Twitter or X at JohnnyJ_15. That's at JOHNYJ_15. And as you know by now, you can find us on wherever you listen to your podcast. That can be Spotify, Apple Podcast, Amazon Music, Google Podcast. We're on Odyssey and YouTube. Just be sure to hit that follow button and subscribe. For you first-time listeners that want to know a little bit more about this show and myself, we do 5 episodes a week, Monday through Friday. And as for me, I work here in Kansas City. I'm based over at Sports Radio 810 WHB. Do lots of stuff over there, but just when it comes to this podcast, we specifically talk Royals baseball and also include the listener a lot, including episodes like today where you just send in your question to either YouTube or to Twitter, and I will be sure to answer every single one in this 30-minute episode. Today's show is brought to you by FanDuel. Right now, new FanDuel customers can get $150 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. Download the app or head to FanDuel.com to get started today. Well, we're kind of up there on record-breaking numbers for questions sent in for a Mailbag Friday. We got about 4 or 5 on YouTube, I believe, and then I counted 31 on Twitter. So I don't have much time to really just screw around here and try to lead into the show. Let's dive right into it with question number 1 that comes from Beeve. Would Melendez get moved at the start of the season or deadline if he isn't getting any better? I want him to stay, but not sure how he will turn out. Well, the problem with waiting till the deadline if he's not playing that well is the return's not going to be very good. Right now, I would still say the return wouldn't be as great as you may think it is. I'm not sure that there's many folks out there that believe MJ Melendez could return a big-time prospect or maybe a guy who's blocked elsewhere in the organization. The numbers offensively and defensively haven't been there. The best chance for MJ Melendez to provide value for the Royals, I still believe, is in Kansas City. If he starts to turn things around and maybe you're not in it by the deadline, then it would be the perfect time to move on from him. But I would give it a sub 10% chance that he would be moved because the outfield depth is so thin. And the Royals want him to improve. They feel like this new stance might be able to help him with that. He did homer today. Not saying spring training numbers will mean anything, but no, I don't view him as a trade candidate right now. And unless the Royals were out of it and he was one of the better offensive contributors by the deadline, I wouldn't see them moving him at that point in time either. Next one here comes from Will. When will we hear about the newest Royals Hall of Fame members? That I'm not 100% sure on. If I can remember correctly, the last time it happened, it was at some point early on in the regular season. Again, I'm just speculating at this point. If somebody does have a better answer about those Hall of Fame members or when the new ones will be announced, I would guess it's going to be early on in the regular season. They might make a game out of it where, first X amount of fans might show up and you get to see the official announcement or something along the lines of that. Again, I'm totally speculating and guessing, so that's not really a great answer for you. But if somebody else knows out there, feel free to let us know in the YouTube comments below. This one comes from Luke. Quick Mailbag Friday question. What team in the division do you think is the biggest threat to the Royals this year? It's still Cleveland to me. Cleveland is such a thorn in the side of the Royals, and maybe I shouldn't even say that because they won the division. I should say a thorn in the side for a team that's always pesky but finishing 3rd or 4th place. Cleveland is the reigning defending champs, and they've got an elite bullpen, one of the best bullpens in all baseball, if not the best. They have the best closer in baseball, and they're a little bit healthier than they were at the beginning of last season. But that offense, it is a bit up in the air to me and trying to make a prediction. It's unknown. I feel like every single year you figure out what Cleveland is going to be, and they surprise you one way or the other. 2 years ago, they underachieved a lot. Last year, they overachieved a lot. But to me, they're just that team that the Royals can never seem to get over the hump on. They've got their number, and they've had their number for a long time. So to me, I think the biggest threat in the division would be the Cleveland Guardians. This one comes from Nail. Do you think Zach Greinke is done even though he's close to the 3,000 strikeout mark? Follow up, do you think the Royals sign him just for that chance or any other team? No, I don't believe Zach Greinke is going to be signed by any team out there. And the Royals, now that they're a contender, wouldn't do that either. I know he's really, really close, but unfortunately, if it was going to happen, it was going to happen last year. I wish that Zach Greinke would have gone out after the 2023 season and not, left it up to chance of getting signed because there wasn't many teams out there. There weren't many teams out there that were truly interested in him coming in last year. And now I don't give that a very high chance either. So I believe that Zach Greinke has thrown his last big league pitch. I would always love to be proven wrong because I'm for Zach Greinke reaching that mark. Just not sold it's going to be in Kansas City. The Royals have a very complete rotation. Not sure how you could find a spot for Zach Greinke on this team, whether it be in the rotation or the bullpen. This one comes from Shane. Will both Loft, or this is actually just a statement on Loft and Biggio, are batting 600. What I saw in Gentry's batting 667 to MJ's triple zeros, although he had a good game today. Chris Stratton and Hernandez both have to go. Getting off to a good start in April is paramount, especially when Renfroe starts off slow. It doesn't start hitting until around the All-Star break and the questions surrounding MJ. I don't believe that both Stratton and Hernandez will be gone. One of those guys, I believe, is going to make the roster. Outside chance would go to Steven Cruz and Evan Sisk. As for the other two, Renfroe likely is going to platoon with MJ Melendez a little bit this year. That'll help his durability. And then for MJ, you do have a point where he gets off to slow starts in April. He can't afford that going into this year. He has to have a hot start to April for the Royals to truly believe he can be a contributor in the lineup. This one is going to be coming from, let's see here, Elizabeth. Do you see Lofton having a breakout season with the Royals? That is if he keeps out the great play in spring trading. Thanks for all the great content on the podcast. Always enjoy listening on your thoughts and keep up with the boys in blue. Well, thank you for the kind words, Elizabeth. And as for your question, I wouldn't say a breakout year. He'll get more opportunities, I believe, to be that super utility guy for the Royals, as will Cavan Biggio. But breakout season, he wasn't good last year. So if we're clarifying a breakout season as maybe it's 250, then yeah, I think he has a good chance of doing that. But in terms of being a everyday player or somebody that's really going to be popping on the national scene, no, I don't see that. Mainly because I don't see Nick Lofton as an everyday player for the Royals in 2025. But still, a good question there coming from Elizabeth, and want to make sure I don't miss any more here. Looks like Drew, we still have more than 4 or 5 actually. So we're really going to have to go rapid fire in the next 2 segments. Drew's question: do you think MJ Melendez loves the game of baseball? I do. He plays the game really hard, and every time we've spoken to him in the clubhouse, he is very much a baseball nut and wants to give 150 to 200% every single time. Sometimes it just doesn't work out, though, and this will be a make-or-break year for him, in my opinion. The Royals can't really afford for him to have another down year and believe in him moving forward. So, yes, he's a diehard baseball guy, probably one of the hardest workers and hustlers on the team. But that doesn't always mean that you're going to be the best player or one of the top players on the team. But to answer your question simply, yes, he does love the game of baseball. George's question is, what is the Royals' biggest weakness besides the outfield? I would say, other than that, it would be the lack of true power at the corner positions in the infield. Garcia doesn't have much pop, and Vinny Pasquantino does have pop, but not as much last year. This is somebody that should be running into 25 to 30 home runs. Yes, durability has affected that. So maybe I'm being a little bit too harsh on Vinny Pasquantino because I believe the power is absolutely in that bat. And I believe he's one of the top hitters, not just for the Royals, but one of the top hitting first basemen in the American League. So the upside is absolutely there, but not having that power at the corner spots, that can hurt your lineup a little bit. You want to have a thumper at third base, and you definitely want to have it over at first base. Garcia brings that down a bit at third base, even though he's got great defense. And Vinny last year just wasn't the type of power hitter that we had seen in the past. Maybe things change, though, going into 2025. And lastly, before our final break, Tyler's question is, do you see any more moves before opening day, and what would that move be? Would any guys without options left be used to trade for somebody? Absolutely. I do think there's going to be one or two moves made before the beginning of the season. I'm not going to speculate on how big those moves will be. If you're asking me a significant move, I'm going to say no. But I would see some of those guys that are out of options being moved for money or being moved for another guy that they could use as depth in the minor league system. But I don't know if they're going to be able to land somebody significant enough to take somebody's spot in the opening day roster, because I'm getting closer and closer to believing that their opening day roster is pretty set, barring any injuries, of course. Okay, let's take our first break of the show. When we come back, we got about 31 questions to get to on Twitter, so we'll try to go for about 15 to 16 in each segment. So let's hustle up here, take a break. You're listening to Locked On Royals on the Locked On Podcast Network. You are tuning to Locked On Royals on the Locked On Podcast Network. I'm your host, Jack Johnson, and you can find me on Twitter or X at JohnnyJ_15. Want to give a shout out to our title sponsor and our only sponsor in FanDuel. When the game tips off, the NBA action is just getting started, and there's no better place to get in on it than FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. With FanDuel, you can place live bets throughout the game, so even if you miss the opening tip-off or want to bet on a fourth quarter comeback, you can stay in the action. And if you're looking for a bigger payout, you can even combine your live bets into the same game parlay. Right now, new FanDuel customers can get $150 in bonus bets if that first $5 bet wins. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today. That's FanDuel.com for your shot at $150 in bonus bets. Make every moment more with FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA. And for my pick, I will take the KU money line tomorrow against Texas Tech. The Red Raiders are 1-22 at Allen Fieldhouse. Don't see it being 2-22 by tomorrow afternoon. I will take KU to make it 3 straight and winning in Lawrence tomorrow. Let's dive right back into our questions on Twitter. Like I said before the break, we got roughly 31 to get into, and it will begin with sports. Do the Royals have enough pitching to trade the Mets for Brett Beatty, Angel Serpa, or maybe Michael Lorenzen? No on Lorenzen, since they just signed him. They're not going to trade him. And as for Angel Serpa, he will be one of the main inning eaters in the bullpen. They love his stuff. There was interest in him as a starter at some point in the offseason. I can't recall just how close it was to the winter meetings. Feel that the Royals were interested in Brett Beatty, but at this point of spring training and at this point leading into the regular season, the Mets aren't going to trade him. I mean, the Mets are likely loving what he's doing in spring training. He's showing the power. He's hitting for average. It is spring training, but the best time to trade for Beatty would have been earlier on in the offseason, not at this point in spring training. Next one comes from Cole Reagan's Mustache. Why is everyone just okay with trotting Isbell out as our center fielder? And don't give me the he's so good on defense argument. He's fine, but not well above average. He's a deplorable hitter whose career and last season's OPS was 650. He shouldn't be the starting center fielder of a contender. I won't give you that he's just good as a defender. I was actually on a podcast with Preston Farr the other day, and we had the same discussion about Kyle Isbell. And I believe when you get down to the core of it, he is a fourth outfielder. He is a strong defender. I know that didn't want to be the answer that I picked here, but as a fourth outfielder, a good defender. As an everyday outfielder, no. And the reason they're trotting him out there every single day is, yes, the Royals do value defense, but the depth of the minor league level is just not very strong right now for center field. There are guys that can play center field. Gavin Cross has played some center field. Carson Rocafort can be a good center fielder in the future, but those guys simply aren't ready right now. Yes, you could make a case that they should have gone after somebody in free agency or gone after somebody via trade, but to be honest, I'm not sure there was the perfect fit there. And if there was, the asking price was going to be too high. So I wouldn't expect Kyle Isbell to be the center fielder of the future. But unfortunately, for how I can see you phrase the question, the Royals value guys that are good defensively. Don't need to be elite, but good defensively. And they're going to hope that your bat turns around. If Kyle Isbell can do that, as you've heard hundreds of times before, he would be a fine player to have in the outfield. But for him, he hasn't done it yet at the big league level. So to me, they trot him out there because the depth is not there at the minor league level. And there wasn't many great and affordable options in free agency or in trade. But maybe that does change going into next offseason. This one comes from Gary. Other than Bobby, Vinny, and Reagan's, who could you see being cornerstones for the franchise? I would say if Michael Garcia does turn things around. Cornerstone's a strong word. Maybe Lucas Ursig could be that guy because of how many years of control they have under him. Michael Massey's somebody the Royals really love, and I believe he's embraced by the fan base. Just needs to stay healthy. But those are the picks right now. In the future, Jack Caglione, Carter Jensen, Blake Mitchell, those will all be guys that you can build the organization around. But those feel like the main three, Gary, for cornerstone pieces, because I don't use that term lightly. Not everybody can be a cornerstone piece. At this point in time, it's probably Bobby, Vinny, and Cole Reagans. Eli's question is, what's the best and worst outcomes for Melendez and Massey this year? Best outcome for MJ, I would say, is tapping into that power, running into, let's say, 20 to 25 bombs. He hits around 250, and his OBP is north of 330. That would be the best case scenario for MJ Melendez if I'm being realistic. Worst case, he's about what he was last year, and he has another cold start in April, and it leads you to question, is he even worth rostering at that point? So that would be the low point for MJ. For Massey, the ceiling for him this year, I'd imagine, is being close to a 275, 280 hitter. Never going to be a true on-base guy, but like with Melendez, you get around 320 to 330. That's just fine. 15 to 20 bombs. Maybe you can drive in anywhere from 60 to 70 runs, considering he'll be hitting fifth and sixth, maybe seventh the majority of the year. Worst case scenario, he's not healthy. We talked a little bit with Michael down in spring training about the back injury and how it affected him in the field last year. That would be the worst case scenario, is just dealing with that injury throughout the year and not being able to stay on the field for more than 80 games this year. The good question there coming from Eli. Next one comes from Royals Report. Do you have MJ starting on opening day? I do, because I got India in left field at this point in time. Could always change. In right field, I have MJ Melendez because I believe the Guardians are going to start Tanner Bybee. Shane Bieber won't be ready to go, if I'm not mistaken. So Bybee being a righty, I believe there might be a platoon situation in right field. Therefore, MJ Melendez would be starting in right. Or you could start Renfroe in right, and then you could DH MJ Melendez or vice versa. Because if Jonathan India and Michael Massey are both in the field, that will still leave a DH spot in the lineup. This one comes from Jason. Let's say Dairon Blanco starts the season on the DL. Who gets the outfield spot between Prado, Rave, Gentry, and Weimer? I would go with Joey Weimer there, mainly because of the defense, and he can platoon a little bit with Kyle Isbell. Tyler Gentry, probably want to see him get a hot start in Omaha. John Rave, I could see him at the big league level this year. I love the exit velos that he's putting out there, and surprise. He's been very impressive to start camp, like Tyler Gentry. Nick Prado, he's my non-tender candidate, basically. He's my DFA candidate leaving spring training, or they'll find a trade suitor for him. But Joey Weimer would be my pick to make the roster if Dairon Blanco is not healthy to begin the season. Jesse's question is, why do you think a guy like Alex Verdugo remains unsigned at this point? Admittedly, I haven't followed his career, but a doubles hitter that doesn't chase a lot of balls, has a strong arm and solid defense, is not over the hill. Sounds like a solid risk on a one-year deal. And that's a very fair question. To me, Alex Verdugo's either not settling for a minor league deal, he's wanting more than a one-year deal, or people are scared away by the lack of hustling that he showed last year a little bit in New York, got benched a few times. I believe it happened in Boston as well. But as a player, as I've stated before, it's fine as a low-risk deal. If you gave him 1 year, $2 million, $3 million, that'd be fine for outfield depth in Kansas City, considering Dairon Blanco, like you said, not healthy, or the question before you was about Dairon Blanco. That is a factor. Joey Weimer hasn't had a great start to camp. Alex Verdugo is a good defender. You might want that insurance with Jonathan India and Michael Massey playing a little bit of left field. I'd be fine with it for the right price, but clearly he's either asking for too much or he's asking for too many years. That's why I believe he's not signed at this point in time. Jeremy's question is, who's the greatest surprise of surprise this year? It's still pretty early. I would say one of the surprises has been, well, Noah Cameron was before his bad adding. You know what? I'm going to say Chris Bubich. Chris Bubich was damn good today. That spin rate on his slider is ridiculous. He is running away with that number 5 spot. And the reason I can't pick any hitter to this point is, Jonathan India's look good. You expect him to. Nick Lofton might be the surprise of surprise. He's hitting 714. Michael Massey's looked good. Garcia's looked good. But it's so early that I'm not sure I could pick somebody just yet. But Chris Bubich has looked good. Offensively, I'll go with Nick Lofton for my other pick. Brody's question is, how well does Cags have to hit to make up for the lack of positional value he brings compared to J.J. Weatherholt in order to be more valuable in the long run? He doesn't need to be a true elite first baseman, but if he was a bad first baseman defensively, he would need to be a 30 home run guy every single season. He would need to be hitting anywhere from 250 to 260, probably playing 140 games or 150 games every single year, especially early on in his career. On base wise, you're hoping to get to the 340, 345 clip. WRC plus, OPS plus, give me something over 110. That would, if he was a bad defender, I would take those numbers with 30 home run potential every single year. But JJ Weatherholt, he will be the guy that you're watching alongside Jack Caglione, not just because Weatherholt's with the Cardinals, but because the Royals could have taken him and he would have been a perfect fit for Kansas City. But they went with more of the upside in Jack Caglione. Those two will be compared a lot over the next handful of years and how quick they make it to the roster and how they fare at the minor league level. Let's get to one more here. We'll go to Jerry. If you were to pick one non-top 10 minor league bat and arm to break out this year, who would it be? My picks would be Austin Charles and Felix Arande. I'll go with, let's see. I don't hate the Austin Charles pick. If I was to look it up on the fly going to last year, because they're always changing up the top 30, so I want to make sure I don't pick somebody who's inside the top 10, as you said. Daniel Vasquez is another guy that I know a lot of people are high on. I want to make sure he's outside of the top 10. Jack Caglione should be number one on this list, and you're going to have Jensen and Mitchell. But Daniel Vasquez, I think, was outside the top 10. Yeah, Vasquez, they have at 23. So he would be one of my picks. And then, LP Langevin, who we interviewed a few weeks back, he's another guy that I really believe can pop. And then Luander Avila. Love the stuff we saw in his first outing, his only outing, actually, of spring training. I believe that's going to play very well. And if I was to throw maybe one more in there, I mean, Noah Cameron technically was 12 last year. He'd be another great pick. And then I'd say Steven Zobak. If I was going to give a few names, I know you said two, but I'll go with four names there. Those would be the four that I feel pretty confidently in breaking out for 2025. A good question there coming from Jerry. All right, we're going to take our final break of the show. When we come back, we'll have rapid fire answers for the remaining questions we have right here on this Mailbag Friday. You are listening to Locked On Royals on the Locked On Podcast Network. You are tuning to Locked On Royals and the Locked On Podcast Network. I am your host, Jack Johnson, and you can find me on Twitter or X at JohnnyJ_15, and you can listen to us on wherever you get your podcast. Our next question comes from Lil John Boy. Does Drew Waters have a shot at making the big league squad out of camp? I'm going to go no on that. His best opportunity was last year with the thin outfield depth, beating out Kyle Isbell. He hit well in spring, and he still didn't get that chance. Then last year at the big league level, appeared to be a bit overmatched again. This year, you're just not hearing his name enough come up. I don't know if Drew Waters is even going to be in the Royals organization by the end of camp. So as of right now, to your question, I'm going to say no, he does not make the roster out of big league camp. It'll more so be, does he make any roster in Kansas City coming out of camp? Tate Cardinal asks, which would you rather have on the roster, Kevin Biggio or Nick Lofton? Here's the catch. I believe both of them make the roster. With Dairon Blanco dealing with that Achilles soreness, Joey Weimer not having the strongest start to camp, Nelson Velasquez not looking too good. He's out of options. Nick Prado, same exact thing. Those feel like the two that can replace the roles of Adam Frazier and Garrett Hampson. You had a righty there, super utility guy, and a lefty, super utility guy. You've got very cost-effective guys in Kevin Biggio and Nick Lofton. They're cheap, they're affordable, they can play multiple spots, and they've had really good camps. So I don't know if I need to pick one or the other. I believe that they're both going to make the roster, at least with the way things are shaking out right now. This one comes from Brother Cag. At this point, what can we expect from Frank Mozzicato? I feel like I haven't heard much about him lately. I'm not out on Frank Mozzicato. I just have not been pleased with the lack of velocity in the first couple of years of the minor league level. When he was drafted, he was a little bit older for a high schooler. He was sitting in the high 80s, low 90s. It just hasn't progressed since then. And that is concerning to me because you're getting to that point of his minor league career where you needed to see those big jumps. There are other pitching prospects that I have ahead of him now. I still believe he gets a chance to prove himself at the big league level, but he's going to need to make a pretty significant jump stuff-wise going into this year. But you're right. You haven't heard much from him because last year was a bit of a down year for him. Hopefully he can bounce back, though, for either Quad Cities or AA Northwest Arkansas this year. Jeff's question is the new Royals TV deal with FanDuel, Amazon, a one-year deal or multiple-year deal? How much do the Royals receive? Not 100% sure on how much the Royals are receiving from this. I'd have to do more digging onto that. Not a bad question at all. I just don't have the info in front of me. And I believe it is a multiple-year deal. I don't believe it's a one-year deal. FanDuel Sports Network is just the rebranded version of Bally, and I believe that deal was lined up to be multiple years. So if I can answer that first one, I am fairly confident it is more than just a one-year deal, and that'll be the way you're watching the Royals for the foreseeable future. Paul's question is, why do you think they won't pull the trigger on Alex Verdugo? Same question we got not too long ago. I do believe it's because he's asking for either 2 years or he's asking for more than $5 million. And he's trying to ask for money that the Boston Red Sox or LA Dodgers, Alex Verdugo, would have been asking for. But in reality, he needs to be asking for the money that the Yankees' Alex Verdugo is worth, which is not much more than a one-year deal, less than $5 million a year. That would be my best guess as to why he's not signed at this point in time. Ryan's question is, any word on how Lorenzen and the others performed the B game today? Yeah, Michael Lorenzen threw 2 innings the other day. He had actually been battling the flu when I was down there, so this was his first chance to go out there and throw off the mound in a live game. I think he gave up 1 run from what I was told. So 1 run out there, 2 innings. And as for the other hitters, wasn't anybody that truly popped. I know it's maybe not something you wanted to hear, but Jack Caglione was in that game. I can't recall what somebody said he did at the plate. It was nothing too spectacular. Nelson Velasquez, same thing, was another guy that was over there. But unfortunately, in that B game, just not a lot happened that I was aware of other than Michael Lorenzen was out there on the mound. He was healthy, looked good for the most part, and he was able to come off the mound feeling better because he was not looking too good, and we were down there dealing with the flu. We were going to have him on for an interview, but it just ended up not working out. Okay, this next one comes from Casey Preds fan of what I can guess we can call the big 3 of Quad A Royals players between Waters, Prado, and Nelly. Who do you think has the best chance of maybe at least becoming a consistent major league contributor? I'm going to go with Nelson Velasquez. Drew Waters has had his opportunities in Kansas City. Nick Prado, same thing. Nelson Velasquez, kind of tail end of 2023, and then a little bit of 2024. The power is noticeable, though, and I do believe that he'll get a shot at some point in Kansas City this year, whereas the other two, I'm not sold. I mean, it was very telling to me that when Kyle Isbell was struggling last year, Drew Waters didn't get a chance. And when Vinny Pasquantino went down in the playoff push, J.J. Picollo in the front office elected to go with 40-year-old Yuli Gurriel, who hadn't played in the bigs that year, over Nick Prado. With Velasquez, he at least has the benefit of playing at a corner outfield position, and he's got power. So that would be my pick. I'll go with Nelly to be a big league contributor of those 3. Ryan B. asked, could Lofton be considered for a starting job in the outfield or only a bench spot? Only a bench spot to me. He'll be that Garrett Hampson type this year unless they bring in somebody else. Jonathan's question, with the Royals' known interest in Santander and Profar this offseason, and Renfroe and Lugo and Stratton coming off the books, could the Royals make a legitimate offer to Kyle Tucker in the offseason? Lorenzen and Perez both could be off the books or renegotiate as well. I would love that pickup. Kyle Tucker would make that corner outfield spot a hell of a lot better. And if the Royals, I'll tell you this, if the Royals go back to the postseason this year, I expect them to go pretty big into the offensive market going into 2026. That's just an assumption I have right now. Nobody has told that to me, just purely an assumption. If they make it back-to-back years and you're coming off a year where you played well and you swung and missed on a middle-of-the-order bat, I believe that would be one of their focal points from the get-go because Jonathan India would still be under contract. You're not looking for the leadoff bat anymore. You would be going for a middle-of-the-order threat, and that would be Kyle Tucker. So I would love that move with all those guys coming off the books. Trent's question is, how many games should Freddie catch? I feel like it should be more than half with Salvi first or DH often. I'm with you. I'm hoping they can get Salvador Perez down to 80 to 85 games this year behind the plate just to make sure that offense is still there. And we saw in Mike Matheny's final year in 2022, he had that incredible 50 home run season basically because he DH'd a lot. I would love to see Freddie behind there at the plate, but you got to make sure that Freddie can still hit a good amount. And when he was overexposed a bit last year, we saw him slump pretty significantly. But I would love to see Salvi at his age to make sure the offense stays there only catching about 80 to 85 games this year. Travis's question: what is a trade the Royals have made in the last few years that you think they'll regret? I would imagine trading Andrew Benintendi late was pretty poor, and trading Scott Barlow late was very poor as well. That was just mismanagement in those years where they felt like they were closer to contention than they really were. I would also say that the trade that sticks with me was that Padres trade in 2017 when they tried to go for it. I didn't hate the idea, and Matt Strom and Estuary Ruiz were fine. I mean, Ruiz still hasn't really caught on at the big league level. Strom was an all-star last year, but the three guys they got in return just weren't very good. That was one of the worst trades or return of investment that I've seen for the Royals in quite some time. But in the last handful of years, I would say trading Andrew Benintendi very, very late when they could have flipped him after that first year that he was able to have. So I would venture a guess that would be my pick at this point in time. Also, Whit Merrifield. They traded Whit Merrifield way, 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 way too late into his prime. They could have gotten a pretty decent return when he was in the middle of leading the league in hits, and the Royals were nowhere close to contention. This one comes from Bobby. How much faith should we have in the outfield? I'd keep it at about a 5. I wouldn't get too high or too low in spring training because it's spring training. Be hopeful for the bounce backs, but also be expecting maybe a little bit of a letdown from a handful of the guys, because the reality is not all three of them are going to be good, average major league players in 2025. Elijah says new predictions of what pitchers make the roster. Haven't changed much. Carlos Hernandez actually looked good today, so I'll put him back over Chris Stratton. Therefore, my rotation would be Reagans, Lugo, Walker, Lorenz, and Bubic. And out of the bullpen, I would have Daniel Lynch, Sam Long, Angel Serpa, John Schreiber, Hernandez, Harvey, Ursig, and Carlos Estevez. So those would be my 8 out of the bullpen, and then the 5 in the rotation. This one comes from Richard. I'm newer to baseball and the Royals. What prospects for the Royals should I know? Jack Caglione, Carter Jensen, Blake Mitchell, Blake Wolters. We'll go Luander Avila. We'll say Chandler Champlain and Noah Cameron. Those will be some names to watch going into 2025. The Mizler has 2. I've seen a lot of people make it sound like Blanco isn't a lock for the outfield, which is confusing to me of late because of his base stealing. So behind MJ, Izzy, and Renfroe, who do you think get the final 2 outfield spots between Blanco, Nelly, Gentro, Prado, Weimer, and Waters? I'd go Blanco and Weimer if it did come down to those 2 outfield spots. And you have a follow-up question between Cameron, Wright, Marsh, and Lynch, who would probably just be the bulk guy for a bullpen game. Who do you think will be the first man up if one of our top 5 guys go down? It'll be Daniel Lynch if one of those guys go down. But if Daniel Lynch is thriving out of the bullpen, I would expect Noah Cameron to get that shot. Maybe over Alec Marsh if Alec Marsh isn't healthy. But I guess if you said if all of those guys are healthy, I'm going to walk myself back there. I'm going to go Alec Marsh will get the first chance, then Daniel Lynch, then Noah Cameron, then Kyle Wright. Mad Jayhawk 92 asked if you could take one former Royals player in their prime and drop them onto the 2025 roster, but they have to play a completely different position than they did in their career. Who are you picking and why? I would maybe go Beltran. If you play him out of position, that might have to be the infield. So throw him over at first base. You'd still have the bat and the speed of a prime Carlos Beltran. Or if you could have George Brett playing second base, maybe just a low-value position. You take an MVP-like candidate, add him to the roster. That would be another guy that I would go with there. This one comes from Show Me Boy. Obviously, all hypotheticals here, but say the Royals are in a similar position at the deadline. How would you feel about JJ working a deal for JJ Bleday, headlined by Blake Mitchell? I know they're probably going to have to decide between Mitchell, Jensen, and Ramirez soon. I personally think that trading Mitchell would yield the biggest possible return for a middle-of-the-order bat. I wouldn't hate it just because JJ Bleday is young and under control. But Blake Mitchell is somebody they really, really love, and it would have to be a blow-away type offer. And unfortunately, I'm not sure just J.J. Bleday could do that. We also got to see how Blake Mitchell responds from the broken hand that he suffered in camp. Will be a little bit slower starting to get going, and that may affect him in any type of deal at the deadline. And lastly, Chris asked, the surprise player for KC this year is, I'll go Jonathan India. I believe Jonathan India will get more hittable pitches because Bobby Witt Jr. is hitting behind him, and I think he's going to transform that top-of-the-order spot for Kansas City. All right, that's going to do it for another edition of Locked On Royals and the Locked On Podcast Network. I've been your host, Jack Johnson. Thank you for making Locked On Royals your first listen today. For your second Find Locked On MLB as baseball guru Sully brings a daily blend of humor and baseball, keeping you updated on every rumor and story throughout the offseason. Find Locked On MLB on YouTube or wherever you listen to your podcast. We'll be off this weekend unless some major signing or trade happens. So until Monday, you take it easy, Kansas City.